It all started with a leak. Not a secret memo, not an expose, but a short, sharp post on social media. If Blue Origin spent as much time innovating as they do on lawsuits, maybe they'd actually have a real product by now. The author? Elon Musk, a man who turned Twitter into his personal podium, effortlessly destroying reputations and creating new trends. The target? Jeff Bezos, one of the few who could fight back. This wasn't Musk's first jab at his competitor, but this time, something felt different. The response came quickly. SpaceX is great at PR, but not at keeping commitments. NASA deserves reliable partners, not loud statements. And just like that, the billionaire war began. Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are two of the most influential entrepreneurs of our time. One built Amazon and became the face of the consumer revolution. The other created Tesla and SpaceX, reshaping how we think about cars and space travel. Their rivalry has lasted for over a decade, but until now, it was mostly contained to business competition. However, things have changed. Their conflict spilled out of boardrooms and financial reports. Now it's playing out in the public sphere, involving government agencies, lawsuits, and massive PR battles. Inside the White House and corporate headquarters and newsroom offices, analysts began to ask, is this just another ego clash between two rich men, or is there something more at stake? And indeed, the stakes were high. This wasn't just about the private space industry. At the heart of the conflict were multi-billion-dollar NASA contracts, the right to dominate space, and maybe even the battle to control humanity's future beyond Earth. But there was also a third player, the one no one was openly talking about. Washington's backrooms were in chaos. Lobbyists were busy with meetings, and corporate lawyers worked tirelessly. The question wasn't just who would win, but who would the government back? SpaceX had long built a reputation for tackling ambitious projects and delivering results. Musk was never afraid to promise the impossible and prove he was right. Blue Origin, however, played the game differently. Their strategy was conservative, more bureaucratic, but reliable. For those at NASA or the Pentagon who valued stability over spectacle, the choice was clear. But Musk played by a different set of rules. He attacked where others stayed silent. The media, social networks, public speeches, his weapon was words. That's why this new phase of the conflict began with a Twitter post. But it wasn't just words. Behind the scenes, a serious battle was already underway for contracts, for influence, for government support. I knew this would happen. I work with analysts who studied every public statement made by Musk and Bezos. We tracked their rhetoric, how they prepared for public appearances, and the topics they emphasized. I saw Musk changing tactics. If before he simply mocked his competitor, now he had launched a full-scale campaign. Suddenly, major tech publications started running articles about how Blue Origin was falling behind SpaceX. Influencers on Twitter talked about the old world of Bezos versus the new world of Musk. SpaceX launch videos were getting millions of views, while Blue Origin's achievements stayed in the shadows. Bezos' camp wasn't idle either. In the Senate and Congress, questions were being raised. Had NASA become too reliant on SpaceX? Shouldn't a more reliable partner be considered? This is no longer just business. This was a battle for space. The conflict quickly escalated, and active preparations began in Washington. Lobbyists' offices, which had just been discussing budgets for new space missions, were now filled with heated debates about the future of American space exploration. The stakes were high. This was no longer just a war between two billionaires. The outcome would decide the future of America's space ambitions for decades. It's important to understand that space is not just about science and exploration. It's a strategic resource, the future of energy, communications, and even military technologies. NASA contracts are not just money. They represent control over key technologies and capabilities that could determine who dominates the Earth and beyond. At that moment, the White House became the scene of a diplomatic battle. On one side was Musk, who had earned a reputation as someone willing to take risks for ambitious projects. His SpaceX had been successfully launching rockets and setting new records. Musk was a PR master and attracted attention wherever he went. In contrast, Bezos represented a more stable and conservative model. as Blue Origin was moving slowly but steadily, carefully building relationships with government agencies and securing more and more NASA contracts. But now, as Musk gained popularity and started to dominate the market, many began to question whether his approach was too risky for a serious partner like NASA. One high-profile White House official, directly involved in decision-making, shared his thoughts on the situation. "We can't just ignore how SpaceX manipulates public opinion. They take risks, but always with the goal of doing even more ambitious things. And it's these things that could threaten the stability of long-term NASA projects." And while Musk and Bezos continued their public jabs, behind the scenes, the battle for influence for government support was in full swing. Meanwhile, within the space agencies, the tension was growing. At the forefront were political games, overshadowing ordinary technological disagreements. Lobbyists from both sides were hiring top-tier lawyers to influence the government and secure favorable contracts. There were even proposals that required NASA to choose between two types of partnerships. A long-term partnership with Blue Origin, offering more stability and reliability in their work. The dynamic but risky approach of SpaceX, promising faster results, but with greater risk. Some in Washington began to voice concerns that if NASA didn't back SpaceX, the US could lose its leadership in space. Others reminded everyone about the safety and clarity of Bezos' plan, making NASA's choice even harder. While Washington was debating the possible consequences, the media battle continued for public opinion. Musk launched a powerful campaign on Twitter, where his tweets went viral almost instantly. Within days, phrases like "the future belongs to Musk's innovations" or "it's time for stability" Bezos were dominating the conversations. Media outlets were filled with debates, and the attention only increased the pressure on both sides. But the most interesting developments were happening in the Senate. Here, many began to ask questions about the future of the space program. Senators began to make statements suggesting that NASA should focus on stable partnerships, not chase flashy promises. Statements from senators like Johnson of Texas, who expressed doubts about SpaceX's sustainability, were serious signals for the entire space industry. "I love dreaming like everyone else, but space is not a place for shows," he stated at a press conference, clearly referring to Musk's increasingly aggressive PR campaigns. In response, Musk continued to argue that with such an approach, NASA risked falling behind China and Russia, not to mention private companies that could dominate the market if the US didn't move forward. The standoff was intensifying, and now, the key question wasn't who would win in business, but who among the billions would claim the prize. This was a much more serious matter than it first appeared. Since Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos began openly exchanging jabs on social media, their conflict not only attracted attention, but also became the foundation for political maneuvers, lobbying efforts, and strategic decisions that would determine the future of not just the private space industry, but also the entire American space program. The question was not only about who would win this competitive battle between the two billionaires, but also who would secure the support of the US government in the fight for the NASA contract, which had enormous economic and strategic consequences. In Washington, where the future of space leadership was at stake, a political storm had begun. Lobbyists, lawyers, and consultants had all become part of the game, fighting for influence and control over the country's space policy. Every statement, every public position taken by Musk and Bezos began to matter. However, at that point, neither of the players fully understood the depth of the threat hanging over the American space industry. Previously, the two companies, Musk's SpaceX and Bezos' Blue Origin, had operated in different niches. SpaceX had already established itself as an aggressive and risk-taking player, capable not only of undertaking ambitious projects, but also of making them a reality. The company actively developed new technologies, with its Falcon and Dragon rockets becoming symbols of innovation in private space exploration. In contrast, Blue Origin operated more cautiously, earning a reputation as a reliable partner, though it hadn't made any dramatic technological breakthroughs. However, in this quiet war at the highest levels of power, a turning point had already emerged. Joe Biden and his administration found themselves at the heart of the battle for future contracts. Rumors began to circulate in Washington that behind the backs of presidents and ministers, at the level of senators and members of Congress, an equally intense battle was taking place as in the open public debates. Another important detail was that Musk and Bezos were no longer just competing businessmen. They had become the embodiment of two fundamentally different approaches to the future of space. Musk, who played the field of public opinion and was skilled at manipulating information flows, and Bezos, who preferred stability and traditional dealings with government institutions. This rivalry had become much more than simple competition. It was about what the American space future would look like in the coming decades. It is important to understand that NASA contracts were not merely funding for research or rocket launches. They represented control over the most critical technologies that could influence not only America's future, but also that of humanity as a whole. These technologies primarily involved energy, telecommunications, and military applications, which could be used for defense and security purposes. In the White House, the administration was deeply concerned about how to avoid the political consequences if one side gained a clear advantage. Biden and his team began assessing the risks. Musk, who had massive influence and was beloved on social media, appeared to be a dangerous partner for long-term projects. In contrast, Bezos with Blue Origin represented a more stable but less dynamic model. However, the importance of the issue was becoming increasingly clear. Regardless of who won in business, the decision about the future of space was already beyond just the rivalry between two billionaires. The question was what strategy the US would choose for its space future. As the stakes in this confrontation began to rise, the conflict between Musk and Bezos stopped being just a personal dispute between two entrepreneurs. It became an important political issue. During this epic rivalry, several key moments emerged that would determine who would gain the support of the federal government and, consequently, control over future NASA contracts. One of the first blows in this new phase of the conflict came with the issue of suborbital flights. Musk actively leveraged SpaceX's achievements, showcasing his Falcon rockets and Dragon capsules, which not only quickly reached space, but also performed landings and returns to Earth. These demonstrations garnered massive popularity and media attention, creating a powerful image of a technological leader. At the same time, despite successful flights, Blue Origin continued to operate in its own way. Although Bezos' company also conducted launches, their rockets didn't generate the same level of excitement in the public consciousness. Everything changed when Bezos himself flew on the suborbital rocket New Shepard in 2021, becoming a living symbol of his enterprise. Despite its significance, this event did not generate the same buzz as a SpaceX launch. However, it was enough for Bezos to begin actively lobbying in Washington that Blue Origin was a more reliable and stable player for long-term projects. But the rivalry with Musk only fueled Bezos' determination further. He began working closely with lobbyists to raise concerns that, despite its success, SpaceX did not guarantee stability, and at certain stages, Musk's ambitions could even threaten safety. Senators representing Texas and other space-focused regions began to voice concerns about the over-reliance on SpaceX and how it might lead to vulnerabilities in the U.S. space program. Press conferences, media statements, and talks in the Senate continued. Every day, new and fresh points emerged in the public debate where Musk and Bezos hurled accusations at each other. Musk, as usual, continued posting sharp tweets. Let's not forget that behind these outdated concepts in Blue Origin lie billions of taxpayer dollars, he wrote, referring to the fact that Bezos' project was partly funded by government money. In response, Bezos, in his own tone, began to argue that Musk was ignoring the long-term consequences for people, displaying a dangerous tendency to take risks. One of the most powerful figures in this battle became Senator Ted Cruz from Texas, who emerged as a strong ally of Musk. He actively advocated for SpaceX's more dynamic approach and raised questions about the importance of maintaining American leadership in space. However, his positions began to raise doubts among more cautious senators, such as Johnson from Wisconsin, who stated that space is not a place for shows. He emphasized that, against this backdrop, NASA needed a long-term, stable strategy based on trusted partners. At a time when the nation's attention was fixed on the debate, Senator Liz Cheney from Wyoming also entered the fray. She proposed an investigation in Congress into how feasible it would be to continue relying on SpaceX for astronaut transportation to orbit and satellite servicing missions. This became yet another blow to Musk's image. By this point, it was clear that the battle for government backing had become more intense. Musk didn't fall behind. He knew that key to victory would be not only technological achievements, but also public opinion. He once again leveraged his main strength, social media. Each new launch, every successful SpaceX mission was meticulously covered and promoted on Twitter. Musk continued to emphasize that NASA could not afford to wait too long for stability, as China and Russia were actively advancing their space programs. He argued that without ambitious goals and risks, the US could fall behind. This phase of the battle became a true battleground for experts, analysts, and journalists who tried daily to predict how the situation would unfold. Musk versus Bezos was no longer just a personal vendetta. It represented two completely different views on how the space industry in America should evolve and which of these models would provide greater benefits. At this time, discussions were still taking place in the White House. It was no secret that within the administration, debates had begun about what would happen to NASA if Musk continued to take on too many risks, or if Bezos remained overly cautious and fixated on stability. The conflict between Musk and Bezos reached its peak when real threats began to emerge in Washington. Lobbying efforts and political maneuvering escalated, as it became clear that the decision to support one of the companies would directly impact the future of the US space program. This moment became pivotal, not just for Musk and Bezos, but for the country, which stood on the brink of choosing who would lead it into the cosmic future. The climax arrived when senators, congressmen, and influential figures in the White House began publicly expressing support for one side, and the issue was no longer just about funding or stability. Now it was a matter of choosing between two completely different strategies for the space industry. On one end of the spectrum was Musk's dynamism and ambition, driving innovation at an immense speed, unafraid to take risks and push the boundaries of what was possible. On the other end was Bezos's caution and stability, preferring less risky but longer-term solutions. Of course, space is not just about technology. It's about geopolitics, and in this context, every choice, every decision about backing one player or the other would have consequences for the entire United States. Moreover, these consequences were not limited to space exploration. Whoever controls space controls the future of military technologies, energy resources, and global influence. Capturing the attention of senators, Musk, as always, actively used his media connections and public platforms. He once again exploded social media with new statements, accusing the administration of risking leaving America behind in the space race. He appealed to nationalism, arguing that if the US doesn't develop ambitious projects like Mars colonization, China and Russia will take the lead. Meanwhile, Bezos and his lobbyists worked with more traditional political forces, presenting Blue Origin as a company capable of ensuring stability and longevity for government projects like returning astronauts to the moon. This position began to gain more influence among those in the White House and NASA who were skeptical of Musk's fast-paced approach. Then an unexpected player entered the scene, the Pentagon. Among military observers, the conversation shifted to the fact that the high risks associated with SpaceX's ambitious projects could jeopardize national security if Musk's technologies were not reliable in the long term. Bezos, on the other hand, was building relationships with the military, arguing that Blue Origin was the dependable partner the country could rely on for strategic deployment of resources necessary for defense. Musk's protests continued. He argued that the military might find itself in a very uncomfortable position if the US falls behind global competitors, and that issues like Mars colonization are not just scientific pursuits, but crucial for long-term security. In response, Bezos argued that space development shouldn't be a game of Russian roulette with taxpayer money, claiming that his approach was more measured and sustainable. At this point, the presidential administration realized that the issue at hand wasn't just about America's future in space, but its broader global political position. Lobbyist groups, political consultants, and even scientists and technologists began to draw attention to how excessive politicization of space could hinder progress rather than accelerate it. discussions and consultations with experts on both sides reached their peak. As debates continued, more and more analytical articles began to appear in the media, openly discussing the consequences of potential decisions. Musk began to be associated with a new face of American space exploration, moving forward at incredible speed and risk. Bezos, on the other hand, remained the symbol of the old school, embodying caution and stability in space exploration approaches. This moment became decisive not only for the two billionaires, but for the entire country, which now faced the monumental decision of what its space future would look like. For Musk, it would be not just a victory in business, but a larger struggle for America's place in the new era. For Bezos, it was a chance to retain influence in the traditional space sector, which was vital to his long-term strategy. As the tension in Washington reached its peak, the Biden administration realized that the prolonged conflict between Musk and Bezos could not continue without consequences. After months of public statements, Senate debates, and lobbying efforts, the situation had reached a point where any decision could significantly affect the U.S.'s strategic position on the world stage, as well as the long-term sustainability of its space ambitions. However, the decision did not come quickly. Additional consultations, closed meetings, and even intervention from political advisors were needed to determine which approach best aligned with America's long-term space strategy. The final decision was not only about choosing between the two companies, but about how the U.S. should approach space exploration in the context of growing global competition. In the end, a compromise was impossible. Under pressure from lobbyists, senators, and the entire political elite, the administration was forced to make a choice in favor of one of the players. Despite Musk's enormous influence and massive popularity, the U.S. space program ultimately decided to support Bezos and his Blue Origin. This decision was driven by the fact that Blue Origin's approach seemed more compatible with NASA's long-term strategy. Steadily developing, Blue Origin could provide a more reliable partnership for critical missions such as returning to the moon and further space exploration. At the same time, Musk did not go unnoticed. He continued to demonstrate his ambitions and capabilities, winning new contracts that ensured SpaceX's leadership in satellite launches and crewed missions to the International Space Station. But for long-term missions, including the lunar program, support from NASA and the U.S. government went to Blue Origin. This choice was also linked to the recognition that stability and reliability play a crucial role in government contracts. Bezos and his company, despite their slower start, already had experience working with key government institutions like NASA and the Pentagon, which made them a safer choice in the eyes of many officials. Musk, on the other hand, remained a character whose ambitions often outpaced the practical readiness for long-term space expansion. For Musk, however, this choice became an important lesson. He realized that sometimes, to achieve global goals, it is necessary to build stronger connections with government structures rather than relying solely on hype and popularity on social media. He decided to strengthen his efforts to improve his image within official circles, continuing the fight for more risky and ambitious projects. Bezos, in turn, had scored an important victory, but he knew that the path ahead would not be without challenges. Blue Origin, despite its stability, would face new obstacles. Issues with implementing lunar missions, ongoing competition from SpaceX, as well as internal infrastructure and technological questions. All these remained on the agenda. Although the conflict ended with a partial victory for one player, it served as a harsh reminder to the entire space community about how high the stakes were in space exploration. The issue was no longer just about who would secure the next launch contract, but about who would be able to dominate the future of the space industry and control strategic resources that would decide who rules not just the Earth, but also space. Now that the choice had been made, the U.S. found itself at a crossroads. This decision would have consequences not only for these two billionaires, but for the entire future of the space race, where the stakes were much higher than simple entrepreneurial competition. The influence on the course of history had taken on new dimensions, and each subsequent step in this game would determine not only space leadership, but also the strategic position of the U.S. both on Earth and beyond.